Welcome back to Investing Talk Podcast. Today we are going to be focusing on Nauticus Robotics.
Okay.
They trade under the ticker symbol KITT,
Got it.
and they operate in the autonomous subsea robotics sector.
Interesting.
So, we always try to kind of look at the technicals and the markets and the news when we analyze these companies, and you've put all that together for us. So, really want to try to unpack it today. What do you think?
Well, there's certainly a lot to look at when it comes to KITT. I mean, the stock has experienced a roller coaster ride. Just looking at the price over the last year, you can see some pretty big swings.
Yeah, there's a lot of volatility there for sure.
Yeah.
We've got details on those price movements. We've got details on the trading volume, the moving averages, both short and long term, and the relative strength index. So, a lot of data to cover, but I think it tells us a lot about kind of what the company's been through and maybe what they're going to go through.
Yeah, just based on the technical analysis, we saw a huge decline from the highest point last year. I mean, it was down 92% to a low in December of 2024. But then something interesting happened. I think a lot of this recent upward movement, can be attributed to the announcement of the SeaTrepid International acquisition. That was back on March 5th, 2025.
And, boy, did that ever kind of breathe some life into the stock. We saw a jump of over 25% in pre-market trading the very next day. And by March 11th, just a week later, the stock had a weekly gain of over 10%. Like momentum shifted right there.
Yeah, and if you look at the trading volume, it supports that observation. The news of the acquisition definitely got people excited. You saw a big spike in the number of shares being traded, way more than the average daily volume we were seeing in January. And, usually when you see that kind of volume with a price moving upwards, it means buyers are feeling pretty confident, at least in the short term.
Okay, so let's dig into these moving averages a bit. What can we learn from those?
So, in mid-March, around the 15th, let's say, the 50-day simple moving average was probably somewhere between $1.50 and $1.80. And with this recent rally, the stock price actually pushed above that level. Generally speaking, that's a good sign, shows some short-term strength. But you have to remember the 200-day SMA, the longer-term average is still much higher, probably somewhere between $3 and $4. That tells us that even with the recent jump, the stock is still trading below its average price for the past year. So two different stories, right? The 50-day gives us a glimpse into what's been happening in the last couple of months, while the 200-day smooths things out over the entire year.
So even though we've had this recent positive movement, we're technically, according to that 200-day moving average, still in a downward trend.
Basically, yes. Crossing above the 50-day SMA is encouraging for the short term, that's for sure. But the stock's got a ways to go before we can say it's completely broken out of that longer-term downtrend. Technical analysts watch for what they call a golden cross, which is where that shorter-term 50-day moving average crosses above the 200-day. A lot of times they see that as a signal of a potential shift from a downward trend to an upward trend. But we're not quite there yet with Nauticus.
Got it. So how about the relative strength index? What's that telling us about where the stock's at? Is it overbought? Is it oversold?
Well, I think after the news of the acquisition, the RSI probably jumped up somewhere between 60 and 70. And that kind of rapid move, getting close to what we consider overbought territory, it tells us that there's a lot of speculative interest. And it also raises the possibility of a pullback, especially if the fundamentals don't improve quick enough. Now, before that, back when the stock hit those lows at the end of 2024, the RSI was probably below 30. And that's generally considered oversold. And then as of March 17th, it looks like it's settled somewhere in the 50 to 60 range. So that tells us it's got some momentum, probably more neutral or bullish, but not overextended just yet. And, moving into the 60s and 70s can mean strong momentum, but for a stock like Nauticus, which has been known to be volatile, you really got to look at those underlying fundamentals, see if those are keeping pace with the price. Is it just speculative buying, or is something more substantial happening within the company?
So it sounds like the technical picture is kind of mixed, right? Some good signs in the short term, but still some questions about the longer term.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
Okay, well, let's move beyond the technicals then. I mean, we've got information here on broader market trends. We've got details about this strategic acquisition of SeaTrepid International and their recent earnings reports and some of the industry partnerships they have going on, like the one with Leidos.
Yeah, I mean, if you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, you see that Nauticus operates in this really interesting space, autonomous subsea robotics. And it's definitely a sector that's getting more and more attention, especially within defense and tech. Even though the market's been kind of rocky in the beginning of 2025, those sectors have held up pretty well.
In this acquisition of SeaTrepid, it feels like a really big move. Does it align with those broader trends you were just talking about?
I think so, yeah. What makes this deal so interesting is that SeaTrepid has a strong network in the Gulf of Mexico. And, that's a huge hub for offshore energy infrastructure. And that's exactly where autonomous subsea robotics could really take off. I mean, it has the potential to cut costs and boost efficiency in a big way. So it's not just about Nauticus adding capabilities, it's about them getting a foothold in a very specific and profitable market. And if you look at the industry news, it's clear that subsea robotics is on the rise. There's demand from oil and gas, renewable energy, even the military. So SeaTrepid's established presence in robotic services really complements Nauticus's AI-driven autonomy software. And I think beyond just the initial impact on the stock price, what we might see is that this merger will create some really interesting synergies. Combine Nauticus's cutting-edge technology with SeaTrepid's operational experience in their existing relationships with customers, and that could lead to a faster adoption of their products and services. Of course, like with any merger, there's always challenges integrating different company cultures and technologies. That's something to watch out for.
So it sounds like it was a smart move, not only in terms of developing the technology, but also making sure they have the operational infrastructure to actually put it to work.
That's a good way to put it.
Now, we've also seen that the stock price can be pretty reactive to news. Why do you think that is?
Well, the pattern is definitely there. I mean, the big jump after the SeaTrepid announcement, that's a perfect example. And, going back a bit, we saw the opposite effect when there was news about potential delisting warnings from Nasdaq Q and when their quarterly earnings weren't so great. And I think this all highlights that for a company like Nauticus, which is still in its growth phase, specific news events can really move the needle because those developments can have a big impact on how people view the company's future.
We also have some information on the financial restructuring that Nauticus did. What kind of impact did that have?
Right. So this is a really important point. Nauticus has gone through some significant restructuring with their debt. They've converted a lot of their debt into equity, and that has really strengthened their financial position. They also secured a convertible debenture, and all of that combined has really helped to stabilize their finances. In fact, their shareholder equity is now above what Nasdaq requires. So this deleveraging, it's a good sign for their long-term stability, and it could attract some investors who were maybe hesitant before because of the debt levels.
So good news on that front.
Uh-huh.
And what about those industry partnerships, especially the one with Leidos? How important are those for a company like Nauticus?
I think they're crucial. When they can successfully complete projects with these big industry players, it validates their technology. It shows that it can actually be applied in real-world situations. And I think the Leidos partnership in particular, that sends a strong signal that there's growing confidence in their autonomous underwater vehicles, not just for commercial use, but for defense as well. And these types of partnerships can really open doors. They build credibility, lead to bigger contracts, and ultimately help them reach a wider market.
All right, and finally, what about the market sentiment? What are people saying on platforms like X? What's the general feeling out there?
Well, I'd say it's mostly cautious optimism. There's definitely a lot of excitement around upcoming events like the Q1 earnings report that's coming out on May 12th. And just looking at the discussions on X, you can see there's a lot of interest from retail investors. They're excited about the recent price jump and the potential of this technology. But at the same time, there are still concerns about the stock's past volatility and, Nauticus's history of losses. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. You've got the excitement, you've got the caution. And it's important to remember that a lot of this sentiment is still speculative. It's not necessarily grounded in concrete financial performance.
So just to sum all this up, we're looking at Nauticus Robotics, a company that seems to be making a comeback after going through some rough times. And this acquisition of SeaTrepid International appears to be a major turning point. It's had a noticeable impact on the stock price, and trading volume has gone up.
Yeah. And from a technical perspective, we are seeing a short-term upward trend. The price is now above its 50-day simple moving average, but it's still trading below the 200-day SMA, so that longer-term bearish trend could still be in play. The RSI, however, suggests that the stock is now in neutral to bullish territory, which is an improvement from where it was before.
All right, and zooming out a bit, Nauticus operates in this growing sector, this intersection of technology and defense, with a focus on autonomous subsea robotics. And the acquisition of SeaTrepid seems to fit perfectly into their strategy. And we've also seen how sensitive the stock price is to news, both good and bad. But the efforts they've made to restructure their finances, that debt-to-equity conversion, for example, I think that's really helped to stabilize the company.
No doubt. But while all the recent news and the low share price has definitely attracted some speculators, the company's long-term success really hinges on a few things. First, they have to successfully integrate SeaTrepid. Then, they need to start securing and fulfilling contracts. And ultimately, they need to become profitable. And while some analysts have set price targets around $5.75, suggesting that there's room for the stock to grow, there are still significant risks. I mean, the short interest is high, and they still have to prove that they can achieve sustained growth in both revenue and earnings.
And it's important to keep in mind that everything we've talked about today is just a snapshot of the situation as of March 17th, 2025. The upcoming Q1 2025 earnings report on May 12th, that's going to be crucial. It'll give us a much clearer picture of whether this recent positive momentum is actually translating into real financial results.
Absolutely.
So keep an eye on the data, folks. Keep track of the news. And most importantly, form your own informed opinions.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what all of this technical recovery and strategic acquisition, what it ultimately means for Nauticus Robotics.
Right.
And maybe even for the entire subsea robotics market. It's something to think about, that's for sure.
Well, if you've got some thoughts, be sure to subscribe, like, and comment below. Let us know what you think about Nauticus Robotics and this fascinating world of autonomous subsea robotics.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
See you next time.